In today's video, I have collected disturbing legal stories on Reddit. If you like this series, please let me know and sub to the channel. Let's dive in. Here is a disturbing story about a man who broke into someone's home and assaulted her. I have a really big question/advice needed. Backstory: back in August of 2020, I had a random 40-year-old man break into my home while I was sleeping with my infant son and my daughter was asleep in the other room. I have no idea when he broke in or how long he was in my home, as we were all asleep for about 5 hours. He started to SA me while I was sleeping next to my son. I woke up screaming, and half asleep, dazed, looked over to see a half-unclothed man doing bad things. I jumped up and began screaming and fighting him over my infant as he was screaming. I was able to call 911 with the emergency feature on my phone while fighting him off as my baby was screaming. We were basically fighting over him, and he was very scared. He was about 8 months old at this time. He ran away once he heard 911 operator say police were on the way. I ran to my daughter's room immediately to find her hiding under the covers, scared. She had been awake and hiding there the entire time, being as quiet as possible. When I was screaming her name, she wasn't sure if he was still in the home or not. She was untouched, thankfully. She was 7 at this time. The cops took almost 20 minutes to show up. Thankfully he had ran out, because I would have been dead. A CSI unit came and photographed everything, DNA swabbed everything. Another thing is, I had bought a new phone the night prior. S&D literally had just set it up before I went to bed and left my old one on the couch downstairs. He had taken the phone before assaulting me, assuming it was my only phone. Fast forward to court proceedings. They let him out 8 months later on a PR bond. He had an ankle GPS, so they said I'd be safe. 3 days and he let it die for 12 hours and went AWOL, so me and my children were put into a hotel for safety. They took him back into custody. The prosecution and SVU told me they were offering him 8 years and on the sex offender registry. Then 2 months later, they said because his DNA took so long to process and because he was on drugs when he broke in and assaulted my family, that he could use that as a defense, and they didn't think they wanted to take it to trial. They are now releasing him after less than a year in custody, 10 months. He has 10 years probation and sex offender registry and sex offender treatment with drug treatment. They want me to be okay with this. I begged and cried and told them no, because we can't just sell my house and leave. But they wouldn't listen and basically only called to tell me, not ask for my opinion. He is going to be released July 1st and already filed a motion to be released next week, early. I don't want to make this story public as it's something really traumatic for us. I have nightmares all the time, a hard time sleeping. If I hear a noise even at night, I get a panic attack. I believe this man was stalking me prior, but we have no proof. My question/advice is, what can I do? Can I take this to social media to get coverage? Would the news even care about something like this? I just know when he is out, every second me and my family are in danger. He's had all that time to think about what he's going to do to us. I just don't know what else I can do to keep us safe. This was a complete stranger who none of us had ever seen or met before. All my neighbors have husbands. How else would he have broken into the only home without a man there? There has to be something else I can do. I just feel helpless. I wish SVU was really like the shows on TV, where they actually care. I was pushing 40 when Mrs. Bristle's file hit my desk. Some estate litigation where a mother's last will and testament left my clients next to nothing and gave their sister, Mrs. Bristle, pretty well the entire estate. When I saw the defendant's name, it looked familiar, and after a bit of Googling, I confirmed what I suspected. The defendant, Mrs. Bristle, was my former grade 9 English teacher. I remembered Mrs. Bristle very well. She was supposed to be teaching us the wonders of English literature, but what she really taught us were her rules, by which she meant her arbitrary whims, expressed in vague language, backed up by petty punishments for non-compliance. There was an art to getting along with Mrs. Bristle, and while most of the other kids learned it easily enough, somehow I did not. I have trouble learning unwritten rules, and in Mrs. Bristle's class, where unwritten and constantly changing rules were the order of the day, I didn't stand a chance. Mrs. Bristle admonished me almost daily for not paying attention. I did detentions, rewrote assignments, and made visits to the principal's office, all because I apparently wasn't listening, wasn't doing what I was told. Mrs. Bristle often took me to task for missing some obvious but unstated part of an assignment. One time I handed in a sonnet and received an F because the rhyming pattern was Petrarchan, not Shakespearean. But she would be nice to me, Mrs. Bristle would always say when she tossed my work back at me. She would give me another chance to hand the assignment in with the arbitrary changes she required, in the end giving me a good mark, but then heavily downgraded for being late. Mrs. Bristle's case worked its way through the early stages, and every time I exchanged an email with her, she didn't need a lawyer, she claimed. I thought about the unpleasant time I'd spent in her class. I had a rough time in high school, and I always resent anything that makes me dwell on it. After a few months, the case was ready for the next stage. It was time to examine Mrs. Bristle, to find out why she thought her mother wanted to disinherit most of the family and enrich Mrs. Bristle alone. I showed up at the court reporter's office early as usual to get set up. "What's up?" Adam asked. He was a lawyer colleague about my vintage, and we were sitting in the court reporter's lounge. "I'm going to examine my grade 9 English teacher today," I said, "and it's going to be fun." I explained how she'd hated me back in the day and had done her best to make my life hell. "What's the case about?" Adam said. Adam had been around the block, same as me, and it took only a few words for me to summarize everything that mattered in the file. Estate fight, 1 sibling against 4, undue influence, holograph will cutting out most of the siblings, competing with an older will, a formal one, where the shares are equal. Adam nodded appreciatively. "Nice fees, if the estate's got the cash." "It does," I said. We chatted for a bit, and then sat there in silence as we each did the last bit of prep for the cases we had that day, making notes, reading documents, and drinking coffee. My alarm dinged just before 10, and I made my way to the examination room, and Mrs. Bristle, the teacher who'd greatly disliked the grade 9 version of Called in the 90s. I was curious to see if she would like the older version any better. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The examination started, and Mrs. Bristle and I sparred for a while, me tossing vague questions her way, and criticizing her when she did not understand. I kept her on the defensive for close to 3 hours, until it was getting on to 1 p.m. "Aren't you in a conflict or something?" she said to me just before the lunch break, when she'd finally made the connection, and understood that the lawyer asking her questions was a former student. "No conflict," I said, dismissing her concerns with a wave of my hand. "During the lunch break, there's something I need you to do. I don't want to answer questions during lunch. I need a break." The examination had been rough on Mrs. Bristle. She was not used to being asked questions, to being held to account, to being constantly challenged, and even having her grammar corrected now and again. "You'll get your lunch break, but while you're eating a sandwich or whatever, keep this copy of the holograph will next to you." The will on which Mrs. Bristle's case relied was a holograph will, meaning that Mrs. Bristle's mother had written the will entirely in hand from start to finish. The mother, or more likely Mrs. Bristle herself, had downloaded a will form from the web and had completed it in accordance with the website's instructions. Holograph wills are special. You can do a holograph will without a witness, without a lawyer, without anything at all, so long as you did it right. But if you got anything wrong, if you messed up in any way, it was invalid. "You want me to read the will again over lunch?" Mrs. Bristle said. "No. Instead, I want you to make a handwritten copy of it. You want me to write it out? Whatever for? There's an allegation that the will wasn't written by your mother, and that you wrote it up instead. An allegation that I'd made up myself, that morning, while I was sitting in the lawyer's lounge, drinking coffee and munching on a muffin. My clients had not challenged the will's handwriting. It was obviously their mother's, totally different from Mrs. Bristle's own writing. But I had decided otherwise. Mrs. Bristle was appropriately outraged at being unjustly accused of forgery. Said she could prove it wasn't her handwriting, could absolutely prove it. "Then let's settle the forgery issue once and for all," I said. "Write out the will in your own hand, so that our document experts can examine it, compare it with the original, and make a determination." "I don't need the entire lunch break for that," Mrs. Bristle said, "and I'd rather eat lunch at the restaurant downstairs." The will was barely a page long, at most 300 words, that being all it took for the mother to allegedly disinherit most of her children, and inexplicably leave everything to Mrs. Bristle. The mother had written up the will herself, but she'd been 90 at the time, while living in Mrs. Bristle's house, and very much under her influence. "I've retained 5 different experts," I said, "and each of them will need copies." "5 experts? Why so many experts?" "Each expert needs 10 samples for comparison purposes. It's going to take you a while, Mrs. Bristle. I suggest you get started." I overrode her protests, and once she started to write, I left her in the room and went to the lawyer's lounge to eat their small sandwiches and drink more of the excellent coffee. After a while I stopped by the examination room to look in on Mrs. Bristle. I wanted to check in on her progress. Mrs. Bristle asked for more time, complained of writer's cramp, and asked me again if it was really necessary for her to write out the holograph 50 times in her own hand, and I assured her that there was nothing for it, that it was absolutely necessary. I returned to the lounge to check my emails, leaving her hard at the homework I'd given her. After a while, my colleague, Adam, popped into the lounge. He asked me how it was going, the examination with the teacher who had treated me so badly. I'm making her write lines. Adam laughed and laughed harder when I explained that I wasn't kidding, that I really was making Mrs. Bristle write lines, and how I was doing it. His laughter attracted attention, and a few other lawyers asked what was up. He's making his teacher witness write lines, Adam said, and the lounge hooted with laughter when I told everyone what was up. It was one of the pettiest things I've ever done to anyone, making my grade 9 teacher write lines. But the writing lines thing was just a warm-up. The real revenge had yet to come. I returned to the examination room after a while, to check up on Mrs. Bristle, see how she was doing. "This is taking forever," she said, "and I really don't get why you need it." She had writer's cramp, and was shaking her hand to get the kinks out. I picked up the stack of holograph wills she'd created, and flipped through it. She was nowhere near finished. On second thought, I said, "Maybe it isn't necessary. I think you're right. I don't need any handwriting samples from you." "Why not?" she said. "The will is invalid," I explained, adding that because her mother had used a pre-printed form off the web, the law would not recognize the will. "A holograph will has to be entirely in the testator's handwriting," I explained, "every single word entirely in handwriting from start to finish. This will doesn't qualify because your mother used a standard form, a form printed off the web with instructions and boxes and questions and so on, and when you do that, then the will is no longer a holograph will. It's a regular will, and regular wills need to be properly witnessed. This one isn't witnessed, and that means it's not a will. It's just a piece of paper. Are you trying to tell me you only figured that out now? What kind of lawyer are you, anyways?" "What kind of lawyer am I?" "I'm a lawyer who makes a witness skip lunch, and sit in a small room all alone, and write lines. Sound familiar, Mrs. Bristle?" She said nothing, and just stared at me. I closed the door on her, leaving her alone once more, and left for the Middle Temple Tavern where the lawyers all hung out. It was time to hoist a Guinness and enjoy my petty triumph. Divorce cases are some of our favorite. Here is one case we particularly enjoyed. I've spent the last several years working with law firms as a computer forensics expert. I've helped lawyers with a great many cases over the years, analyzing evidence for their clients on computers, phones, drives, the works, and even presenting/explaining it all as an expert witness in court. One case in particular sticks out. During a particularly contentious divorce case, out of nowhere, the wife was making allegations of physical abuse. And she was being very specific, right down to the date and time, location, everything. The husband, who was very wealthy, was also undergoing radiation and chemotherapy treatment for late-stage cancer, and from his physical condition, it was obvious to everyone, even to non-medical personnel, he couldn't win a fight with a dried leaf, let alone raise a hand to his wife, who was several inches taller, probably 20 pounds heavier, and a betting man would say she was probably stronger than him as well. He countered by saying he had photos on his phone proving he was far away from the incident and couldn't have touched his wife. This is where I come in. His lawyer brings the phone over to my office. I find the photos in question, verified the metadata wasn't doctored/altered after the fact on any of the photos, and determined if there was anything else that was worth testifying to about the court. Luckily for him, the location service was enabled on his phone when the photos were taken, so the phone embedded the location's GPS coordinates into the photos. I emailed the info to the lawyer, and he replied, asking me to determine the exact location of the GPS coordinates on a map, the distance from where she alleged it took place, and what my schedule looked like to come testify on the matter. When it came time for me to take the stand, the lawyer for our side calls me up, and with large poster boards of the photos, along with the metadata listed, I showed the court all the methods I used to determine the photos and the metadata they contained were original and undoctored, and then showed the GPS coordinates embedded in the photos and their location on a map. I showed that the location of the photos I extracted from his phone, which were selfies he took documenting fall injuries he sustained prior to going to the ER, were taken 45 miles from where his wife stated, under oath, the assault took place, and the timestamp was within 3 minutes of her allegation. I also verified that the only recent change in the phone's time was the phone automatically changing to daylight savings time. The judge then turns to the wife, who was representing herself, and most definitely fit the cliché of a fool for a client. Rather pointedly asked, "Are you sure you wish to continue with this case?" And then asked the wife if she had any questions for me. All the wife said was that all the things I said were stupid and had nothing to ask me. As I passed by the wife's desk, she muttered several choice four-letter words to me. The judge clearly heard her and was not happy. I left the courtroom prior to hearing anything else, but from what the lawyer told me afterwards, not only did the wife come dangerously close to being thrown in jail for contempt and perjury charges that they already had her dead to rights on, the husband ended up getting everything he was asking for in the divorce, and she got nothing. Law students in Canada have to complete a 1-year apprenticeship before they are called to bar. The process is called articling. As the end of the articling year draws near, students always wonder whether the firm will keep them on or give them the heave-ho. This is how I got the heave-ho. I saw my uncle at Christmas when we were over at his house for dinner. He asked how my articles were going. The short answer was not good, but I told him that things were okay. "If you decide to stay on there, let me know the lay of the land. Maybe I can send some work there." My uncle was a VP in Giant Corporation, a large institution embedded in Canada's financial system, and my uncle was in charge of adding or removing firms from the company's list of approved counsel. My uncle was the star of his side of the family, the one that had risen up high. His brothers, including my dad, had done well enough, but my financial institution uncle had really hit it out of the park career-wise. I didn't see my uncle all that much. Once or twice a year was about it, but he always interested in what I was up to, how I was doing. He'd offered to pave the way into downtown big law for me, that being a trivial task for him. All he had to do was drop a word into the ear of the managing partner of this firm, or that, and I would be in. But me being me, I refused. "I want to do this without any help," I said, and while my uncle understood my decision, he let me know that he was there to help. Over the next 6 months, I suffered in the strange hell that was my articling year, and as June approached, I sometimes asked myself what exactly had motivated me to refuse my uncle's help. Looking back, it was exactly the kind of help I needed. Other people in the firm had gotten their jobs through family influence, the junior lawyer that I worked for being a prime example. But I had been focused on doing it on my own, and that's probably how the firm saw me, as a young guy doing it on his own, without influence, a nobody. The month of May was torture for me, and then June came, and with it, the end of my articles. At the beginning of June, it was time for a meeting with the partner who had been overseeing my articles. It was the exit interview, marking the end of my time at the firm. I should have listened to my uncle, I said to myself as I walked down the hall on my last trip to the corner office of the partner that was overseeing me. If I'd listened to my uncle, let him help me, maybe I'd have landed at another firm, a firm that might have respected me. Instead, I was walking down a hall to an office where a man was waiting to fire me. The partner was supposed to be overseeing my articles, but he hadn't been overseeing me, not really. He only summoned me to his office when something went wrong, and unsupervised me went wrong a lot, because the partner had handed me over to a 3-year junior for training. The junior had used me to do his legal research, write his legal argument, and appear on his motions, taking credit for the things that went well, and throwing me under the bus when things went wrong. Usually the partner yelled at me when I came to see him, his office windows rattling with the sound of his rage. But today he was all affability, for this was the last time he'd ever have to see me. It was the day of my exit interview, and the partner was going to tell me that my ass was going out the firm's front door, never to return. "I suppose you know that you aren't being hired back," the partner said, not unkindly, after I closed the door behind me. I sat across from him, and saw his face adopt a rather forced "that's too bad" expression, which I appreciated, because I could tell that he was trying really hard to be civil. I'd decided to act the same way at the exit interview. I knew going in that I'd be fired, and there was no point using the exit interview as a place to bitch and whine about my year at the firm. I'd done enough of that in the partner's office. It was time to leave, and I was going to leave civilly like a grown-up. "I kind of figured that out," I said. The partner had loads of reasons for firing me. At a court appearance, I'd cost them an important client by winning a case. A few times I'd deliberately fucked over the junior that supervised me, and in the entire month of May, I handed in 0 dockets. But I'd been able to cover my tracks on the big things that went wrong, including ruining the wedding of the partner's daughter, a truly sad tale that I will tell one day, when I get the courage, maybe after I've had a few drinks. It wasn't the big mistakes that got me fired. It was the little things that did me in, and one of those little things was that I had no friends in the firm. What did you like best about your time here? The partner said. He was reading from an exit interview form, a bunch of pro forma questions to ask and boxes to tick, one of those thousands of forms that someone says must be filled out, but which no one ever reads. I was just glad of the opportunity, I said. That seemed to satisfy the partner. He scribbled an entry and moved down the form. Is there anything that the firm could have done better? He asked. Now he was stiff, on guard, because he was handing me the opportunity to complain about the firm, and he'd been hearing me complain since day one. Not really, I said. The partner smiled and ticked off the box, recording that the firm had done everything just great. No one at the firm knew anything about me, because during my year there I had not connected with anyone. For an entire year, I'd showed up at the office at 6:15, worked 12 to 14-hour days 6 days a week, pumped out a ton of work and gone to court almost every day. But in a big law firm, working hard simply isn't enough, not for most of us. If you want to stick around at a firm, you need to form real, human connections with people, and introverted me was not the kind of person to form human connections. If I'd had an ally in the firm, someone to back me up, the firm would have found reasons to keep me on. But with no one in my corner, no friend to make note of the good things I did, my balance ledger had only negative entries. What was the best thing about your experience here? The partner asked. That's a tough question, I said, and it was. My articling year took a wrong turn starting on day one, and the unpleasantness had never let up, not for a minute. I resisted the temptation to give him a smart-ass answer, because it would have been really easy to say that I'd enjoyed watching my junior lawyer boss publicly take credit for my work at a meeting, just before he hit the links or headed out to the squash club. I might have said that I loved being deprived of a secretary for half my articles because the office manager was mad at me, and maybe a sarcastic answer might have slipped out, but then my brain fastened on to the one truly happy memory I had of my articles. The one thing for which I was truly grateful. You know why I picked you guys to article at? I said. The partner adopted a polite little smile and shook his head no, as if he cared. Every other downtown firm I interviewed, all they wanted to talk about was my uncle. But you guys never mentioned my uncle. Your uncle, the partner said. Yeah, my uncle at Giant Corporation. Giant Corp's not exactly in my wheelhouse, the partner said. The partner's clients were all big, but not financial institution big. Yeah, the other big firms I applied to, they all made a big fuss, asking me if I was related to him, because they recognized the last name right away. My surname is rare and unusual. In the larger world, the world of normal people, my uncle was just some guy that nobody ever heard of, but in certain subsets of the financial sector, my surname was instantly recognizable, and when I'd been applying for articling positions at the big law firms, my surname always attracted questions. But you guys didn't do that, I continued, and I really respected that. I appreciated that you were hiring me just for me, like my uncle didn't even exist. Really? What's his name? I gave him my uncle's first name. He had to write it down, because his first name was as rare and as unusual as our surname. What does your uncle do? This was just idle chit-chat, the partner still being civil before he gave me the heave-ho. He's the executive vice president, I said. The partner's mask of civility slipped, and for the first time that morning I saw his genuine, unmasked expressions. I saw flashes of puzzlement, of irritation. I felt his gaze wash over me, taking into account my $149 suit and the cheap tie. That's very interesting, he said, in a tone that said otherwise. Let me make a quick call. And while I sat there, he dialed an extension, leaving the phone on speaker. A woman answered, and he spoke the name of the firm's managing partner. There was a pause, and then I heard a man's voice ask the partner what was up. Yeah, so today's the exit day for one of our students, called in the 90S, he said. Say that again, the man said, his voice sounding clipped urgent. Today's the exit interview for. Say his name again. His name, the managing partner said. Called in the 90S. I called out helpfully. What? Is he in your office on speakerphone? The managing partner said. Pick up right now. I hadn't heard anyone speak to the partner that way, ever. But the partner picked up, and I could no longer make out what was being said on the other end. I could only hear the tone, and what I heard sounded like an angry inquiry. Yes, he says he's his uncle, the partner said. He for sure is my uncle, I said. I was at his house last Christmas. I heard another loud question, and then the partner repeated my answer into the phone. I heard more questions, louder now, the tone angry, imperative. The guy the partner was speaking to went on for a while, and then there was a loud click as he hung up. "Your uncle's a pretty important guy, so I hear," the partner said. He was still forcing a mask of politeness onto his face, but underneath was something else, an expression I'd never seen before. It was an expression of fear. "The firm had no idea who my uncle was when you guys interviewed me, right?" The partner hemmed and hawed and bullshitted, but his pen was still on his desk, and the exit interview form was forgotten. "Hey, I appreciate you doing this exit interview and all that, but I have a lunch date, so I'm going to need to wrap this up." A lunch date with Angela. We'd started dating the previous December, and my lunch with her mattered more than the exit interview. "No one ever said this was an exit interview," the partner said. No one except the partner, at the start of the interview 15 minutes earlier. I pointed this out to him. "That's in the past," he said, all forced affability. "You might have a future at this firm." "I might have a future at the firm?" I repeated the phrase back to him, parroting it, parsing it, letting each word bounce around inside my head. "Of course," the partner said, and I asked him what that actually meant. He laid it out for me. They'd hire me back. Move me to the department that serviced the subsection of the financial sector that my uncle's company occupied. I asked what kind of starting salary, and he told me. "So what did you mean when you said that I might have a future at the firm? What's the contingency? What's the reservation?" The partner gave me some more hemming and hawing, but I interrupted him. I interrupted the partner that I had been reporting to for the last year. "The firm knows how hard I work," I said, pointing out that in addition to my own work, I'd done a big chunk of the work of the junior who was supposed to be showing the ropes. "There's never been an issue with your work ethic," he admitted, and I was glad to see how readily he admitted this. That made me feel good. "Okay, and how about my results?" I reminded him that I was the only articling student in the firm that already had a case in the DLRs. Sure, I lost a few motions here and there, but it was my wins that had caused more trouble for the firm than my losses. The partner had to admit that my results were excellent. Way above average. Yet the partner was saying that I might have a future, and it was that one little word that my mind was stuck on, might. But suppose my uncle doesn't send any work to the firm? Suppose he doesn't want to add you guys to Giant Corp's list? Sure, I got along fine with my uncle, but I had zero influence on him. He was just a relative that I saw once or twice a year. I could not ask my uncle to send my law firm work. We didn't have the sort of relationship. The partner said more words, made assurances, talked about opportunities, things that could be done, but I heard none of those words. The talk of benefits and an office of my own, of the partners I'd work with and the files that I'd be assigned, all that slipped by, because after I heard that I might have a future at the firm, my brain stopped processing all the rest, and focused on the unspoken contingency, the condition that the offer included by implication. I don't want a future that hangs on whether my uncle likes me or not, and sends me work or not, I said. I see him a couple of times a year, and I don't want to talk shop with him. You wouldn't have to do that, the partner said. The managing partner's part of the unit you're going to, and he is great at schmoozing. All you need to do is make the introduction to your uncle, and the firm will take care out the rest. I'll think about that, I said. Do you have another offer? Because we'll match it. I had no other offer. But I had an acceptance because Angela had said yes, and we already had set a wedding date. The partner wanted to keep talking, but now it was me making polite noises, little sounds of affirmation as I made my excuses and headed out for lunch with my fiancée. I walked down the hall back to the area where the students all worked out of their shitty cubicles. It was close to lunchtime, and the place was empty, but for one other student dictating away a few cubicles down from me. I reached my desk and started to pick up my personal effects and put them in my briefcase. My phone rang, but I ignored it and continued packing. The phone at another student's desk started to ring, and then another. I was just snapping my briefcase shut when the phone rang at the desk of the only other articling student who hadn't left early for lunch. I heard her pick up the phone, sounding bored and tense and bugged all at the same time. But then her tone changed. "Called in the 90S, she whispered to me with her hand held over the headset. "It's the managing partner." "What does he want to talk about?" My briefcase was in my hand, and I headed for the elevator. "Called in the 90S, the student said again, louder this time, when I pushed the down button on the elevator. She looked at me like I was nuts, but when she saw that I would not take the phone, she relayed my question to the managing partner, as if she were my secretary, and the managing partner was just some guy trying to take up my time. He wants to speak to you about the offer. I pushed the down button, and while I waited for the elevator, I stared out into space, considering the offer that I'd heard from the partner's lips a few minutes before, and which the managing partner wanted to repeat to me, maybe even amplify. I thought about that offer and what it promised. I also thought about the promises the firm had made already. They promised me a lot of things, and they had broken those promises. The firm had spent a year beating the psychological shit out of me, and the thought of spending another minute inside their walls was simply too painful. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened. "Tell him that the offer has too many conditions attached," I said to the student who was holding up the phone, waving at me, trying to get me to come back. She was still trying to get my attention as the elevator doors closed on me for the last time. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd taken the managing partner's call. Out from under the horrible junior that ruined my articles and the abusive partner who didn't give a shit, maybe I would have blossomed. With a decent salary, proper secretarial support, maybe even some mentoring, things would have gone great, so long as my uncle sent work to the firm. But without my uncle, I was nothing to the firm, a nobody. "So did you get fired?" Angela said when I met her for lunch. "Yes," I said, because it was the easy thing to say, and strictly speaking it wasn't a lie, because the partner had fired me at the start of the interview. It was years before I told Angela what actually happened. "I'm sorry," Angela said. "I'm not," I said. "So what are you going to do?" "I'll figure it out," I said, and in the end I did, more or less. But among the many, many bad memories I have of the firm where I articled, one of the worst is being so damaged by the end of the year that it was impossible for me to consider their offer. I simply had to turn it down.